Today, we're really thrilled to have Tom Spadea of Spadea Lignana. Great name of a law firm, by the way. Very Italian, very fun to say, Spadea Lignana. And Tom and his firm are very close friends of Helbraun Levy. They are what we consider to be the best franchise law firm in the country. And so does Entrepreneur Magazine, which over the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years has them rated as the number one franchise law firm in the country. And they are because they're really smart and they're really cool and they know the business really well. Tom, like me, before he became a lawyer, he was actually in the franchise world and spent a lot of time there. So he comes to F&B and the franchise world as an operator and not just a lawyer. So welcome, Tom. Thank you for
Thanks,
joining.
David. Appreciate the opportunity here to talk about franchising. I don't know about
Yeah,
stuff, but one thing I do a lot of.
franchising is exciting. It's not something that we discussed a lot when we first started the firm, just because we didn't consider it for our clients. But especially post-COVID, when we started to pivot and think about QSR, quick serve restaurants, and other things, we started to see some people moving to franchising and doing really well and becoming incredibly successful at it. So I'm excited to talk about QSRs today, how to spin off your restaurant or your QSR idea into a franchise. And so we're going to get into it. So the first thing I have to say, which is the next slide, Alex, is that what we are talking about today is not legal advice. And I will give you 5 seconds for all of you to read the fine print. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. We can move on to the next slide. So let's start here. A lot of our clients have QSRs. It's a big part of the industry these days. What, how do you decide, first of all, if what you have is a good idea for a franchise?
It's a great question. I think you have to really think about the business and the mindset and the goals of the business owner. I think it's sort of like equally. It's kind of like I had my little dog who was sort of misbehaving, and you bring him to a dog trainer, and the dog trainer is training you as much as they're training the dog. And I think the concept and the mindset of the owner are equally balanced in terms of that. So deciding on whether your business, I mean, there's so many businesses that have had success as a franchise. And I think the success as a franchise is more about them becoming coaches and teachers of business owners who could replicate what they did. In some levels, almost more important than what the fundamentals. You've had successful, white tablecloth businesses, QSR, any number of different brands. Yes, category killers, very narrow, cool brands, those can do well because they can take out some of the variables and the complexity of the business, and it's not based on a chef or a model or a personality, or a very complex system that person found right. So the obviously simplicity can help, but I think a lot has to do with so I think there's a number of concepts that can become the simpler the better, because it can just be scalable a little bit quicker. But that's how I would answer that.
So the simpler, the better. So our clients are all in the food business. A lot of them have QSRs. How do you know if it's simple enough to make that first determination as to, you know what, this is something I can franchise? Is anything franchisable?
Well, I mean, not most things are franchisable, I would say. I wouldn't say anything, but I would say most things, certainly in the QSR. I think one good measuring stick would be if you're the owner of this business and you can step away from it for a couple of days, if you've been able to sort of gotten the how of the business on either paper or systems or something, so that managers who are not owners can actually run the business. I think that's a pretty good first step proxy. I tell people sometimes, look, if you're still working 55 hours a week in the restaurant and you're running it, and it's dependent on you, you're probably not ready to franchise. But if you've maybe opened a second location, but that's not necessary either. Sometimes people think, oh, I need three, four locations. If you have it down, it is running, you can step away, go away for a weekend, work on other projects, open a different kind of concept, and the business continues to grow and thrive without you being in there every single hour. Well, that's a really good first step towards franchising.
And is that a result of you being a good coach and teacher, or is it a result of the type of business you have, which is relatively easy to run? Maybe it's just a couple of different products, fried chicken, for example.
I think it's a combination of the two. Uh,
Hmm.
I think it's a combination of the two because I think you can, if you're a good coach and teacher, maybe you can coach things that are a little bit more complex, because you're really in the hospitality business and you're trying to convey, you know, fundamentally, why does the end user come to your restaurant? What is it about it? Is it the food? Is it the experience? Is it the brand? Is it the cachet? Is it, is it the thing to do? Is it too geographic that it might not translate across, multiple openings? Or is it something that it's just this it thing? That's where you see a lot of them coming out of really cool places because you want to bring that to other places. So I think it's a combination of the two.
So you say that making a successful launch requires you to understand you're in a new business because it's not a restaurant anymore
Right.
necessarily. It is a franchise. What does that even mean? What are you talking about? What do we need to know about this new kind of business? Just stepping into it.
So So you're, when you become a franchisor, you are becoming the coach, mentor, and teacher, which is different than becoming the operator or owner, say, of a business. And, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. There's also a lot of benefits that come with that. One of the benefits, we'll get you down the road, is the valuations are much higher in this type of business. It's why us as, say, franchise attorneys or people who are in the franchise consulting business or everybody in the franchise ecosystem, they can deal with people, not only restaurants but gyms, but any wide variety, because franchising itself is its own industry. It's the industry of the business is replicating a business in a systematic way so that someone new to the business can get in up to speed and profitable. Now, the some of those negatives are investing the time and money, right? Like understanding you're in a new business. If you're in, you open a QSR restaurant, you expect, like you, I've been in the restaurant business a long time. You expect that first couple of weekends to be phenomenal, right? You're going to kind of peak and then level off. Franchising is the exact opposite. You have to put in the patience. So sometimes people from the restaurant industry get a little frustrated thinking like, oh, I'm going to be profitable on day one. No, you're building this. There's a longer gestation period between what you would experience in that. So it's those sort of things that you need to think about that, oh, this is a different business. The parameters of success are different. Now, the advantage is it has much higher upside than, say, any single restaurant because you're really not capped. There's no cap like you would be in the natural cap of a location. So that's important to understand that before you even step into it, that, okay, this is a whole new industry I need to learn and understand.
I want to talk about that for a second because our clients are all seasoned veterans of the hospitality industry. They can open restaurants anywhere, but you're saying that franchising is in fact a different sport, and you really have to learn how to be a franchiser. So how do you learn if you've never done it before how do you learn to be a franchisor?
Well, you uh, you hire the right professionals, first of all, who are specifically in that, not just lawyers, but you might need a different CPA, you might need to look at that, and you need to study it. You need to look at it. There are resources out there. You need to go in and talk to people who've done it successfully. The really nice thing about franchising is it's a reasonably small market. There's not that many professionals and brands that are successful. And so it's a very open market and people share. There are trade shows. So you just kind of get into the ecosystem, and you do it, and you just, the best way to learn something is to dive in.
When you say investing the time and money to do it right, what do you mean by that?
So a lot of times people think that I love entrepreneurs, I love restaurant owners, But a lot of entrepreneurs or restaurant owners are like just super impatient. Let's do the shortcut. Let's just get it done. Let's just get open. Let's just, I don't care, whatever. Put me behind the counter. I'm just going to run it myself. Franchising is more, you have to kind of be a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more intentional. So people think, like, for instance, the franchise disclosure document, the FDD, the legal document. People think, well, I can just, once I have that, I'm a franchisor. No, that's like, those are table stakes. So all of the like preliminary work and getting organized, those are just the very early stages. So putting in the time and money to do it right, like getting the right documents, getting the right systems in place, getting the right software, thinking about like, what are the chart of accounts going to be? What's this going to look like when I have 10, 20, 50 locations? Will they be all stitched together? And really thinking broadly about it as a system, not just as a unit. It just takes time and it takes money. And the money, not just the money, not just the checks you're going to write, but that deferred pleasure that I talked about before in the new business, that you're not going to open and start making a lot of money. It's going to take a while until a franchise starts to really mature and make money. Now, the advantage of that is most of my clients, they overestimate how successful they think they're going to be in the short term, but they underestimate how big they can really be. Like the ones that hit it, they hit it huge and the numbers are dramatic. And people don't, it's not a linear game, it's an exponential game. So that's the time and money, being patient to get those first unit up. You think of the royalties you're going to generate from one or two units, it's peanuts compared to the energy you're going to spend to support them. You don't do it for one or two. You do it for
Mhm.
50 to 100. And that's the game franchise.
You have any examples of some recent F&B or QSR concepts that have taken off and done really well?
Yeah, I mean, you think of things like pliables. It's like a category killer that's like
Mhm.
sitting in there, things like
What is a
that.
category killer? You've said that a
So,
couple of
so I
times.
mentioned
How
that,
would you
like when someone
describe
just
that?
like really narrowly focuses on one thing. So you had mentioned fried chicken. I have a couple of clients in that space, and it's really great because they can just get it down. They can get the process down. They can get the speed of service down, the complexity out of the kitchen, and they can just really own that category within, say, a geographic market where it's like, oh, that's the best fried chicken that I want to go to. So I'm going to hit that. Or, that's the best bowl, or that's the best dessert, as opposed to being, the diner-esque menu of everything. Although
Mhm.
there are some that say there's category killers in the diners because they just own the breakfast market. So you own this narrow segment of one piece of it, and you just do it better than anybody else. And so they call it a category killer because you're killing that category for everybody else competing in that space. It's like, oh, well, I can go to this restaurant or this area that has all of these things, or I can go to this one that does it really, 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 really well. Um, so, there's a number of those. I mean, obviously, you go way back and, my partner had launched Five Guys. Like that's a really good example of someone who just exploded the market. They started, same thing. They had a good restaurant, you know, family business. We're really doing this well. We're doing that burger. We're doing that classic, burgers, QSR, a little bit higher end, a little bit higher quality. We're going to do it better at the lower price point, and then boom. But why were they successful? Because they understood the game of franchising as well as they understood the game of making burgers. They were more on the franchise side. They were thinking about it as, how do I teach people this business? How do we do multi-units? How do I get people who maybe they understand St. Louis better than I do? And we're going to give them the playbook and they're going to go execute and open multiples. Panera Bread. Now that's, going back. And there's a number of those players who are just, it takes a long time until you really hit that tipping point and that scale where the franchisees, it's this feedback loop where the franchisees start finding success and you start honing the business, and over and over and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. And each iteration just gets a little smoother, gets a little better to the point that someone can really open the door strong. And it's not always about the brand name, right? And that's another thing that I try to coach and counsel new clients on. It doesn't matter that nobody knows who you are, let's say in Florida, or who you are in Georgia. They will. that takes a long time until it's like, oh, I'm opening a Five Guys or I'm opening a McDonald's and everybody knows the brand. That's why they go there. What you're really selling is that ability. You're selling that playbook to open strong, to do it right. You and I both know there's a thousand mistakes that you can make opening a business. And so the goal of franchising is to like reduce that to less than 100. You're still going to make mistakes, but that's the real key is that they can open strong. They have this proven process. They know what success looks like. And they know how to get the brand into the market quickly through Facebook,
Mhm.
this, through all the marketing methodologies that they can execute on that you have figured out as the owner of your brand in your local market. And then you take that to Columbus, Ohio. Nobody in Columbus, Ohio has ever heard of your brand, but you know how to have that new owner be successful there. And it's really hard to do that with a manager. You're taking on massive risks. You're signing a lease, you're putting a manager. You're never going to successfully open in Columbus. But as a franchise, you're basically renting the business model, sharing in their success, and giving them the playbook. I mean, that's the simplified version of what a franchise is.
That's great. Let's talk about some of the first steps and how we get into it. I've heard a lot of people say, well, you have to open up 5 shops before you can get really into the franchise game because you have to be able to prove that your model works. So you open up one, you open up another one. What has to happen? Does it have to be a certain minimum? Is it more advantageous to open 3 or 4 or 5 before franchising? Tell me about that journey.
I don't think so. I go back to the what's in your head and why are you doing this? Because the truth is, you can franchise your entire business for a lot less money than it costs you to open another location. So you're sort of spreading the risk becoming a franchisor. And I would say that there are pluses and minuses. If you end up, and we have plenty of clients who have 5, 10, 15 locations and then they franchise, sometimes the franchise isn't shown enough love and is not treated as the real growth model and the big hit. And so sometimes it can be actually disadvantage. There can be a disadvantage to having too much corporate infrastructure because
Hmm.
then the franchise is like this little, it's like the stepchild here that never gets the love. Really, it's a matter of do you feel it can be duplicated? And so, sure, if you have 4 or 5 locations, you're going to have a lot more experience. You're going to understand. You might have had a couple that really went off the rails and didn't go so great. And so you bring that learning in. So it could be a better experience, but it's not necessarily required. I mean, if you've duplicated it, all franchising is, if you think about it this way, is a very formal way to do a joint venture,
Hmm.
right? It's a very formal way to do a joint venture. You're the franchisor, you're going to contribute the intellectual property, the know-how, the branding. They're going to be the boots on the ground, signing a lease, getting out there, opening the location, hiring the people, and executing the vision. So, franchising is just a growth path. It doesn't necessarily, I think people sometimes overthink it. Like it's okay. The early adopters, it might be people you know. You might have an unbelievable manager who is really experienced, runs the store so well. They're great. They don't necessarily have the capital. So how do you get them to open a new store? Do you overcomplicate it? You have all these things going on, or you just say, I've had many people say, I'm going to franchise as a method to open with people that I know, just to lay out, hey, here's the relationship. Here's what you're going to pay. Here's the shared success. You're going to take this risk. I'm going to take this risk. So I don't think it's like a go no go. I think it's more of a like think of franchising as a step towards, make it profitable. Yeah, you need a profitable business. It's got to, franchising is not going to answer the profit question. In fact, franchising is going to eat some of your current profits. So go for it.
Let's talk about profits for a second because I understand that there's 2 pools of profits we're talking about. We're talking about the profits for the franchisor, but more importantly, I would imagine it has to be profitable so you can sell it to a franchisee and show them how much potential money they can make. So if you only have one shop, let's say it's an ice cream shop, and It's profitable. What does that even mean? Profitable could be $1,000 a year, or it could be $500,000 a year. Is there a certain number that really makes it attractive to a franchisee?
I think the margins are really important. I think you need to have a high margin business. A low margin business struggles to be. You had asked that question on the first slide, which is sort of what makes a business franchisable. And I think high margins is something that are really important. I think low margins make it harder because they need to pay you a royalty, a marketing fee. They need to invest the money to grow the business. So if you have low margins, it's really tough. What's the number? It's really about return on investment. I mean, there's plenty of offerings that at the unit level, the thing might make less than $100,000 to the owner's pocket, but it's easy to run. Maybe it's seasonal, and they can end up with 3 to 5 of these and build a nice little local empire. So I don't think that rules it out. And then there's others that are, 7-figure investments to get open, and they're going to be generating, a couple $100,000 in profit, but they're probably more complex and more people. So I think percentage of gross margin, if you can have a business, one of the ways to think about that is take your current location and put the burden of a royalty, an imaginary royalty on it. And if that makes it unprofitable, then you're probably not ready for franchising.
And
So if
what
you
is that? What number do you plug in there?
so I would plug in 6 to 9% in additional drag towards your location. So if you're not really putting 20% profit, it's probably going to be really hard to franchise that business, to the owner.
Hmm.
Um, that's how I would look at it. I think you need to be in that, 18 to 20% minimum to really think about it. Now, that being said, there's a lot of costs you're incurring as a unit that a franchisee might not incur. You might have more professional fees. Some of these thoughts on franchising, creating your creative, developing logos, developing the new menu look. Those are costs the franchisee wouldn't spend. They'd be getting that out of the royalty. So you need to look at your business as, hey, if I was an operating franchisee, how profitable would this business be? And so you kind of think about it that way.
That's very helpful. Because, there are rumors go around the industry. One of them is you have to have a minimum of 3 shops, and they all have to be equally profitable for you to get out to market. And that's not true. Is
If
that
I was
right?
buying a franchise, I wouldn't want to see someone with 3 shops and one losing money and closing, because then I'd say, "Oh, good, you took the bullet that I was going to take, and so you
Hmm.
knew what it was to be bad." So I don't. It's all about transparency. Look, business is hard. Franchising's risky. There's no People don't always make money, but it's much less risky to open a business as a franchisee for something that hasn't been, people use the word proven. It's never proven. You can still fail. You can still fail and you open a franchise. You could open a Five Guys tomorrow in the wrong location, and you could just have the wrong managers, and you could also be just a crappy owner and you could fail. It happens. So it's not risk free, but there's
Right.
less risk because they're leaning on that. So no, I think that people who try to tie themselves up in knots and then they're like, ego is like, I've never made any mistakes. No, lead with the mistakes. These are all the mistakes I made over the last 10 years. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for the scar tissue of things that I did horribly wrong that you're going to say, hey, I have an idea. And then you're going to tell the franchisee, no, we tried that. It is a great idea, but it doesn't actually work. So don't do that. And that's what
How
they
do you
pay.
know, how do you know if you can clone it? I mean, is any QSR clonable?
I would say that most are. And I think how you know if you can clone it, if you are following the things where this, I'll go back now to the mindset of the owner is more important than what's happening in the store. To the person who says, I want to clone it, I want to teach him, I want to learn to be a good franchisor. I'm doing this because I want to scale this business and I want a new challenge. I use this analogy. If you've opened a profitable business in the restaurant space, that's like, okay, well, right now we're all watching, the March Madness. That's the equivalent of being a starter on a team, in a Division I team that makes the tournament and is at a championship. You've already done what most people, 90% of the people could never, ever do, maybe 99%. So You should feel good about that. If you're on this call and you're thinking about franchising and you've opened a business that actually makes money, you've done the impossible. You've made that team. Franchising is the next level up. Now you're saying, okay, well, now I want to go to the Olympics. Now I want to play pro ball and be an all-star because we can throw on these slides how many successful franchisors. It's the big time game. So that's how I would say that you got to think of it like that. And that's the answer of can you clone it? Are you willing to say, I want to win an Olympic gold. I want to take my business and I want to blow it out. Don't do it to double or triple your income. Do it for like a 50 to 100x. That's how you have to have that mindset. So the truth is, most can be cloned or they can be adjusted to be cloned. The bigger mindset is the mindset shift of I want to win the big game. That's why you franchise.
So you have to be all in to be a franchisor. You have to be all in. It's not a side job in addition to your restaurant group. It's all in.
That's right. And you'll see groups now that are sort of teaming up with people who are saying like, I'll be your franchise arm and we'll do a joint venture because sometimes the owners don't want to be all in.
Well, that's
Because you're right.
interesting. So
You
wait, let's talk about that for a second. So let's use the ice cream shop. Got a great ice cream shop, does really well. Somebody comes along and says, let's work together. I will take your concept and franchise it for you, and we'll be partners.
Sure, that's happened. It's happening more and more because of everything we're talking about. The hey, I want to be all in and all that. But of course, you're going to give up a big chunk of that future upside to
Yeah.
do that. So, the reality is sometimes you're better off managing and controlling that. And someone on your team, someone in your partnership group, appoint, we actually call it the FDD hero, the person who is going to say, I am all in on this. I'm going to learn what it is to be a franchisor and do that.
Okay. That's a great overview. Let's talk about some of the first the startup costs. So I've got my ice cream shop and I want a franchise. I come to you. I'm going to say, how much is this going to cost me? That's where I'm going to start the conversation. And why don't you tell us what's involved?
So not just legal, but overall, I would say the cost to really properly launch a franchise is going to be 80 grand on the low end to 150 grand on the high end. That's just like in actual out of pocket checks over the course of say 6 to 8 months. Think of it that way, right? 6 to 8 months, 80 to 150 grand. And that's not just legal. The legal portion of that is like 25 to 30 grand. It's actually just a medium chunk of that. You need something called a franchise disclosure document, the FDD. I have this map on my wall here that I talk about. You get you write the FDD and then you have to um, register it in a bunch of states. New York is a registration state, California. And so you have to kind of maintain and have this maintenance. It's going to cost you 10 to 20 grand a year just in compliance. This is why you're playing a big game because you're locking into some of these overhead costs. You're going to need someone to go into your operation and pull out how you do things, simplify it. We talked about a lot about that. You want a professional who's done this before. Yes, you've written an operations manual for your line team, but you want someone to turn it into franchise speak, build a training system, build a training manual, really figure out a way to do this intellectual property and transfer of your intellectual property. And all that costs money. Come up with a branding, a positioning statement, and just the ways you're going to go about there. Study your competition. And, there are professionals in there that I work with all the time that so if someone comes right to me, I'm going to connect them to the right one. And I say the low end, I'll use the example of you have that manager, you just want to do this slow, you just want to kind of get to market without focusing really on marketing or selling the franchise. You just want a kind of minimal viable launch. You need an ops manual, training manual, and your FDD. So that's it. So 25 to 30 grand in legal, 80 to 150 grand in overall cost. And then you're really at the starting line. And then you're going to obviously start incurring costs, moving forward, marketing the franchise. But that's your startup.
So that gets you 100, let's call it 100 to 150 grand, gets you to now I'm buttoned up. Now I'm recognized as a franchisor by the states that I want to do business in. And now I've got all my legal docs in a row. I've got my operations manual ready. So when that first person signs up and says, I want to buy a franchise, you're ready to go.
Absolutely. That's right. And that's why I say it's a lot less expensive than opening another location. Out of pocket expensive, emotionally maybe more expensive, but yes.
Let's talk about how to find those people and ways to sell the franchise because so now we're there. We've come to you. You've got us all buttoned up. We're ready to go. Our ice cream shop's doing great. And we need to find suitable franchisees. How do you find good ones? How do you evaluate? Well, there's a couple of questions. How do you evaluate a good franchisee? And how do you get to market to attract them?
It's a great question. So the first step, I think, is looking within your circles of influence. Some of the best franchisees are customers of the business because they
Hmm.
understand the brand. They love the brand. They're raving fans. Now, 95% of them will be horrible owners and undercapitalized. So you got to fish through that, but they can be good ones. So I think it's really start to go in concentric circles around the people that you know to get those first couple. I made, a great high-end manager would be your first. So those first like 3 to 5 franchisees are going to determine your success or failure because they're going to be the foundation point that they're going to build the culture and everything's going to be built on that. So you really need to think about who are those folks who are going to be the first ones. And we talk about ways to sell. That's almost step 2. The first one is getting those first couple. And those are just going to be hand-to-hand combat, who you know, who's involved. They already know you. You don't have to explain the brand. Get those first couple out. Because then
What's
there's
the
this
what's the pitch? What's the pitch to those first couple? What's the pitch to your manager?
pitch to your manager is that, you can do this. I'm going to teach you how to do this business and I'm going to share in your success. It's an education platform. I'm going to give you my secret sauce, all of it, from the beginning to the end. And then, we're going to build a contract around that that's going to protect you and it's going to protect me so that, you're going to make the lion's share of the profit, but you're going to take the lion's share of the risk because you're going to be signing the lease and you're going to be opening. And I'm going to take my VIG. I'm going to take my tax on your success overall on the top. And I'm going to be there to coach, train, and give you my secrets. That's the pitch. I mean, that's what you're doing basically. And then
Let's get the VIG out of the way. What's a typical VIG or percentage that a
I would
franchise
say it's
or
5 to 8%, depending on your margins.
5 to 8% of gross revenue?
Gross revenue. You always want to take it off the top because there's too much monkey business in the net and it's really hard and you can't figure that out. So it's off the top. It's a number nobody can dispute. Everybody knows what it is. It's going through your POS system, and that's
That's
it.
kind of a big range. How do you decide between a 5 and an 8?
I would say it's based on margins. If you're in a very high margin business, coffee business, frozen dessert business, high margin, lower top line, you're going to have a higher percentage.
Hmm.
Higher top line, lower margins, then I think you might squeeze it, a little bit smaller.
Tell me about some other fees because I get asked this question all the time. So there's a franchise VIG that we're taking the 5 to 8%. And then is there a development fee as well?
Well, you're going to pay a development fee, which is going to be your franchise fee. So you're going to have an initial buy-in that's going to be anywhere from like 30 to 60 grand. By the way, when I talked about those consultants in the operations manual, they're going to help you do an analysis, a competitive analysis to
Hmm.
really get to the right number because
Hmm.
it's a balance, right? You don't want to be too cheap. You're leaving money on the table, but if you're too expensive, nobody's going to buy it and they're going to be unprofitable. So
Right.
there's a fine line there, and
Hmm.
there are people who will help you sort that out. So I'd say it's 30 to 60 grand for your initial franchise fee, which is the buy-in that the franchisee writes you the check. And that buy-in gets you your experience on how to open the location. One big mistake people make early on is they're like, oh, I'm going to go help you find a location. Once we find the location, then you become a franchisee. Don't do that because you're going to by accidentally teach them how to find a location in part of your business and you haven't locked them up yet. They're paying for you to help find the location. That's what that initial fee a big part of that initial development fee, initial franchise fee, that 30 to 60 grand, is to buy your expertise to help them to find a location. You want them locked up with the contract so that you can protect your intellectual property, that they can't
Let's
go
talk
open
about
Joe's.
let's talk about that. Helping someone find a location. So my ice cream shop's in Brooklyn, and the first guy who I know, a family friend, wants to open up a franchise in Philly. I don't know Philly. So he's paying me 30 to 60 grand. What am I actually doing as far as helping him find a location?
So you're helping him find probably well, you're going to connect him to a broker in Philly, probably who understands franchising is experienced. You've
Mhm.
already gone through the process. So you know the traffic, you know the hangups, you know the good things. And so it is transferable. You don't know, you're going to help him find a person. You're going to be a much better interviewer of the
Mhm.
broker, of the real estate broker, because you've done this before than
Mhm.
anybody who, than your family friend who is really like a babe in the woods. So don't, French restaurant owners know a lot more than they realize that they know. Even it is transferable.
So you're advising the franchisee throughout opening. You're saying this location looks good. Maybe I'll take a look with you. Here's the kind of
Exactly.
foot traffic that works. You want the rent to be X percentage of gross, no more. Here's what you can get in a build out from a landlord, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Here's what I wish I knew before I signed my first lease. I would have added this in. Why don't we try to get this in? That's exactly right.
And so in addition to the franchise fee of 30 to 60, the 5 to 8% off the gross. Is there any other way for a franchisor to profit or make money from the franchisee?
Sure. I mean, you have to be careful because you don't want to get a reputation of nickel and diming your clients. But if you have certain sauces or certain materials or certain things that you can sell, you can also get rebates from food vendors or real estate vendors. Back to this real estate example, let's say you have a national thing and you're doing lots of things over time. It's not starting out of the gate. I've had a lot of clients, they monetize it through an annual meeting. They have an annual meeting and all of the vendors that are supporting their franchisees are going to pay a fee to attend the annual conference to educate and teach the franchisees. But that can be a pretty sizable, there can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year
Hmm.
to host these events. So yes, there are a number of ways with caution. You want to be transparent. You really want to make your money on royalties. There are other fees the franchisees pay that aren't necessarily profit centers, but they enhance the overall system. You're going to pay the franchisee should be paying a brand and technology fee of 1 to 3%, which is essentially a pass through. And the franchisor is going to act as the trustee, so to speak, of that, and is
So
going to
that's
manage
like,
that.
so that's 1 to 3% on top of the 5 to 8. And that
Yep.
is for, I don't know, advertising.
Yeah, it's creating the
Yeah.
creative. Let's say you want to create your own app. Those things can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to create. Well, so anything that's like beyond the scale of what one individual restaurant could create is done in the brain. It's this pooling of money of what's going to
Mhm.
be for the long-term benefit of all of the franchisees in the ecosystem. You get the control of that. You get to decide. So maybe you're going to come up with a new logo or a mascot or a new song or something goofy, really cool videos that the franchisees can put on social media. You can really use that money to create that. So it's not advertising per se. Advertising, I would define as the execution. It's creating the creative at a much higher level because you have this pooled resources. So
Got it. So when you see all those McDonald's commercials, that's a result of every franchisee paying some money to the mothership so they can spend a couple $1 million for a, I don't know, Super Bowl commercial.
that's right.
Tell us how you're going to sell. So now we understand what's in it for us. We have royalties, we have a franchise fee, we're taking some money for branding and technology. Who's selling this stuff? Let's just say we don't have a friend or we don't have a manager.
So there are groups out there, I think this is, yourself, yes, it's unwise. And because you don't know what you don't know. Now, some people might have the personality, but generally speaking, you probably want to team up with someone. some people rush out there, and this is where you'll go out there and you'll read on the internet, or someone will pitch you and they're like, oh, it costs you $500,000 to $1 million to franchise. Yeah, because they're going to tell you you got to go hire a 120 to $150,000 salesperson, and that's crazy in the beginning
Mm.
because you don't even have the you don't even have the work volume. You're not going to be generating enough leads there, right? So the best way to do it is sort of a broker network, or what they'll call as a franchise sales organization. Is there's a whole ecosystem in franchising that, obviously, if I brought someone through the process, we make those intros and they go to these shows, and you find people who are they're outsourced franchise sales organizations. They act as basically a broker. You might pay them, well, the good ones, you'll pay them a monthly fee of, a couple grand, $2,000 to $5,000 a month, and then they'll get a percentage. And then they'll be the ones who say, all right, look, we have worked with brands like you before. This is where you need to spend money to generate leads on Facebook or this, or let's go through your list. Let me send an email out to your customer list. But they're experienced franchise salespeople, so that the responses, they're going to know how to handle them. They're probably going to do a better job than you're going to do. And they're going to say, in this business, I think we should do this trade show. Let's go to this trade show. And they're going to work the floor on the trade show to generate leads. But they're not going to cost you because it's fractional. They're going to be dealing with 3 to 7 brands, and that's okay. You want that, actually, because they have like more expensive or more experience to do that. So really outsourcing it fractionally until you get up to, you're doing 30, 40 deals a year. Okay, now maybe we can hire someone in-house, but don't worry about that. You got to get through those first couple stages.
Talk about the broker for a second, because I've heard some nightmare stories where brokers are taking such a big chunk of whatever they're selling and they're doing it for like the life of the business. What's a typical broker fee arrangement like?
So you got to be really careful. There's some unscrupulous people in the franchising business too. I mean, so I think this goes back to, surround yourself with the right professionals who are going to help you weed people out. There's some broker networks who are very, very intrusive. They make it sound very easy, and they basically are partners without investing the dollars. And so they'll take a percentage of your royalty. Now, that being said, there are some broker networks who will take a percentage of your royalty, and that's okay if you know what you're getting into. You have a partner then. That's an equity partner. That's not just a fee. So now, if you accept it and you want to do it and you don't have the time to spend, that can be an okay business decision. I've told you, our approach is, I'm not your priest, your rabbi, or your spouse. My job is to tell you what the risks are, and it's your job to take those risks. So, that being said, you have to be really careful. There's other networks that are fee for service, that, hey, you just pay me a fee. I pay a piece of the franchise fee. You want to be really protective of your royalty, because that's your
Mhm.
enterprise value. Your
Right.
enterprise value long term is a multiple of royalties. So someone who tells you, I'm going to charge you 1% of your royalties, don't worry, just add it. Whatever, the consultant told you it's 5%, just charge 6%. Well, if you could charge 6%, you charge 6%. So now that 1% of your royalties off the top long term, that's essentially like 15% of your overall. And that's part of your profit margin. So it could have been 30, it could have been 50% of your profit margins as a franchisor. So be very careful of giving away these future royalties. And there are broker networks who will do that. And it's really, it's like getting a partner. So I think you're better off going slow, spending the money, back to the using your stores. You don't expect to pull money out of the franchise in the short term. You're going to be better off. Let your current, 1 to 5 restaurants support your lifestyle, pay your personal mortgage, you know, treat you well, and then your franchise is just sitting there and you're spending the money. You're hiring the outsourced salespeople. You're getting the 30, $60,000, but it's going right back out the door to get the next person, and you're thinking about the long-term royalty. Those That focus is going to build a better brand. In 3 to 5 years, you're going to have better control over a system that you understand and is doing well, and that's when you're really going to start to scale it.
Last question about this. How do you find that broker? I know there are networks out there, um, but if you're new to this and you're in the restaurant game, how do you know who to hire?
Well, you should get references, and you should lean on the professionals. I mean, honestly, that's the service of the those initial franchise consultants. And those initial franchise consultants, by the way, the good ones, they don't sell franchises, which a lot of people get annoyed and frustrated and they think, well, wait, isn't that what your job should be? No. Their job is to teach you how to be a franchisor and to get you into the game. And then they're going to make the introductions of some of those brokers. And so you can then sort of trust them because they don't really necessarily have a stake in that. Their job is to just turn people over and create franchises. And then you go to the next level. So I think you need to not, I think you need to talk to a couple. It's like anything. You're really, you need to meet them. You need to feel comfortable with them. You need to get their references. You need to find out their successes. You need to find out their projects that didn't go well because look, anybody who tells you all their projects went well, they're not in the franchising game because it's a hard game. You know,
Right.
back to the Olympics thing. Not everybody wins a gold medal. So you want somebody who's kind of seasoned and who knows what they're doing.
Okay. That makes sense. And by the way, everybody who is listening, if you have questions that you want to ask of Tom, just put them in the chat box, and if they're relevant, I will ask them. Tom, let's talk about what makes a concept successful. We've talked about it a little bit, but I do want to get into it a little bit more. So let's let's talk about that. What does, oh, actually, I guess we'll talk about marketing next. So,
Although we did talk about this, from some standpoint already. Um, you basically the nice part about that franchise disclosure document that we have to put together as a legal document that you have to give to people, disclose all the information, is it's really going to cut. It's going to be that blueprint of how to open the store. So it's going to be a guideline for you to say, this is what it's going to cost. This is our estimate for the build out. This is the estimate of your grand opening marketing. This is the estimate of what your initial inventory purchase is going to be. So it's going to give you that guideline of kind of how. And so a well-crafted franchise disclosure document, it not only covers you legally, it also tells your story in a very uniform format that basically gives the story to the franchisee formally of this is what it's going to take to open the business as a
makes
blueprint.
sense. And so, what does make a concept successful? You've seen a lot of successes, you've seen a lot of failures, and you keep saying that it's not an easy game, it's a hard game. So, when someone comes to you and says, let's just say it's me, and I say, I've got an ice cream shop. Well, whoop-de-doo, right? Everyone's got an ice cream shop. What kind of questions are you going to ask me to determine if you think I'm the right candidate to even open up a franchise?
Well, one is I'm going to ask that question I talked about earlier, is the ice cream shop running in such a way that you're able to dedicate the time and energy into it? Do you have people in place or are you literally still scooping ice cream and you're closing and you're in the mindset, Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth, if anybody's read that, that's a good like primer to getting in the franchise. Like read that book and have delegated a lot of your day-to-day responsibilities out. You're on the path then. And is it unique? Is there a cachet to it? Is there something cool about it? Is it something where it can be, does it have the profitability that we had talked about, that the gross margins, and have you done something that just it's the customers are willing to pay sufficient for the product that it generates enough margins that you can sort of invest the time and effort into doing it right. It's not dependent on a person, it's not dependent on you in there every day to make it profitable. And then, is it the right operator? And that's a question of, are you the right franchisor and do you have the right franchisees? And picking the right franchisee is enormously important for whether or not the concept is going to be successful. And so do you have the right operator? Are they doing this? Did they just read a spreadsheet? Are they just expecting, a standard ROI? It's like the more excitement you build around the concept, the higher risk you have of picking the wrong franchisees. You really need to recruit them. You got to say no to people. You can die in franchising of starvation, which is not great. You never sell it. You spend all this money and yeah, but you can also die of indigestion where you oversell and you get the wrong franchisees and everybody's jazzed up. And the next thing you know, and by the way, dying of indigestion is a way uglier and way more painful death in the franchising world than dying of starvation. Because look, if you don't sell a lot of franchises, your business is better. You created a plan. You know what it takes to open a unit. You can just open corporate units. That 150 grand is probably still money well spent to open more corporate units because you know the business, took a 360 view. But so, you got to be careful. Um, if you're a good personality and you're a good and you have kind of passion in your business and you believe in your business and the business really works at a unit level, you're probably not people on this call are not going to believe this, but guess what? Selling franchises is not the hardest part of this game. People want to own businesses. You see it all the time. People, they talk, all these TV shows, all these, things on the food channel, everything. You go in, everybody wants to own a business. It's like, so believe it or not, selling the franchise is not, it's not the easiest thing, but it is not the hardest thing of franchising. There are ways you can find franchisees. If you spend a little bit of money and you market, you're going to get leads and you have a good story and you get some write-ups about yourself and people really want to be part of it. You're the cool kid club. People want to join the cool kid club. It's human nature. So the marketing, so but you being choosy about who's going to wear your team colors is going to separate you from a concept of being successful or a concept that's just going to have this false start. You
Have
need
you
to be.
seen some examples, Tom, where people have expanded too quickly? They have a good concept, and because I've seen this happen, where a salesperson will come in and say, "I really like this concept," and they sell 100 of them in the first, I don't know, 24 months, and then you look
Disaster.
a couple of years later, and there's none left.
It's a
So,
disaster. I see it all the time. I mean,
what is
honestly,
what are some
it pains
examples of that? Of
it.
someone who's expanded too quickly?
I mean, it pains me, right? I mean, you had that in the frozen yogurt. It happens sometimes in the concepts that like people just get super excited about it. It pains me. I mean, out of confidentiality of my clients, I'm not going to name names, but in my brain, I have at least a half a dozen that I can think of. And it's a painful, painful thing. And it's exactly what happens. You get a good salesperson, people want to be in business, and that's that dying of indigestion. And so what happens is you need to go slow. It's if you want to get to 100 units in 5 years, let's say, which is massively aggressive, you're probably not going to do that. But let's just throw that as a number out there. You don't do it 20 a year in 5 years. You do 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. You grow exponentially because you need to learn what it's like. You end up with 100 franchise sales. There was that Medici's Pizza. They were never a client, so I can like throw them out there. Now, maybe that was like a while back there, but it was the same thing. They had this unbelievably profitable concept in uh, Chicago. They were making huge. It was like a couple $1 million in gross, very low cost. Everybody loved it. It was cat and the people who became the franchisor, they were in the frozen yogurt place. So they had this whole massive infrastructure of how to sell franchises. And they just exploded. People were like, oh my God, Atlanta's going to sell. Let me buy it. And it was a disaster because they hadn't really worked out the bugs as opposed to. So this is like the corollary. You could
Tell me about the
franchise.
disaster. So what was a disaster? Was it a disaster at the unit level where
It was a disaster at the unit level.
the
People
product
got
was
so
not coming
excited.
out right?
They were signing leases that were way too expensive. The people buying the franchise were not operators. They had no idea about the food business. They were buying because they didn't want to miss out on the trend. It was like, you go, I mean, this is like the human story from the beginning of time when people were overpaying for tulips, back in Holland. Like that's what happens with franchising. And people go nuts and they start wanting to buy this stuff out. And then the franchisor gets overwhelmed because you have too many people in the pipeline. So they can't. We talked about the ice cream shop in Philly, going down, looking at the location, knowing the traffic, a lot of hand holding while you build these systems. You get, forget 100, you get 20 or 30 of those in the pipeline at once. You just can't manage that many. So then people will start to make their own decisions. They will start making bad decisions. They'll start making really stupid mistakes because it's not their baby. They're going to be
Mhm.
outside of the compliance. And so growing too fast is a real cautionary tale for franchises. And then so then you have this feedback loop, right? That document we talked about, the FDD, every year you have to disclose every franchisee, every open franchisee, everyone that's in the process. put their names, their numbers, their email, their cell phones. So you have this feedback loop. So if you don't really get those first group of franchisees happy, profitable, and operating, then it's going to explode. You're never going to sell another franchise because they're not going to talk well about you as people do this research. So that measured growth is really, really important. People focus too much on selling franchises in their first couple of years as opposed to opening solid ones. That's the key to this business.
You mentioned, and I want to kind of wrap it up with this discussion. You mentioned that the multiple for selling franchises is pretty hefty. Is there a goal that a franchisor should be looking at as far as the number of units to open before they can sell? Who are they selling it to? And for how much of a multiple?
So for all the audience here, this is why David is like the king here, because all I do is I sit here and talk about how hard the game is and how tough it is and all the traps. But this is why you do it. Yes, the multiples are insane. That's the reason why you want to win that Olympic gold. So you have a successful restaurant. You're talking about maybe a 3 to 5 times multiple of earnings that the owner is taking out, right? I mean, maybe sometimes a little less. It depends what it is. Franchising done well, you get up to what, there's three big points in your journey as a franchisor. When you get your FDD and you're legal to sell, hooray. You actually sell your first store. You're now really in the game. It's official. You're a franchisor. And when you get to what I would call royalty break even. So franchising is from a financial standpoint, very similar to software is it takes a chunk of overhead to run this. But unlike, say, the restaurant business, where it has very high variable cost, every time you sell a plate, every time you open a restaurant, you're incurring a big expense for every one of those transactions. Franchising, you break over this threshold of royalties. And once you generate, say, a couple of $1 million a year in royalties, which that means $50 million in system-wide sales, wherever it is, at that point, you are in an elite class and your business is worth a lot of money. If you get that up to $5 million in royalties, you could be worth $100 million easy. You're talking 15, 20, 25 times multiples
Wow.
of what your profitability is. That's why Jersey Mike's just sold for over $1 billion. Billion with a B. Now it took them what, 50 years. And I used to do a lot of work for their franchisees with leases and all that. And so they did it. All the things I'm talking about here, they're a best practice in the franchising space. Go
Mhm.
slow, right operators, managers become franchisees. It took Peter decades to get that thing right. And look at what that thing is worth at the back end. That's a case study in something done right that took a long time. So that's why you franchise for the absolute generational wealth, yacht money, home run business. That's it, right? 8 billion. There you go. That's so that's a best practice. And there was no secret sauce there. I'll tell you, I went to like 3 of his conventions because I used to speak for doing the leases and I did a lot of the M&A work on the franchisees. It was blocking and tackling, profitability at the franchise level, people who had their head screwed on straight and didn't oversell and didn't go out and have 100 of these snows, just methodical growth. Franchisees make money, you respect them, they like you, you're in this shared vision and you're moving forward. And the multiples are nuts because it's a hugely profitable business because you can support. When I was on the corporate side, I used to sell franchises. I was at Rita's Water Ice. I helped them go from 300 to 500 units. I don't know, we had like 20 people in the corporate office. It's not a lot of people, but it would take 20 people to support 10 restaurants. Like that's the kind of mindset, right? It takes a while to grow, but man, does it make money once it gets over the hill. It's a phenomenal business.
And who's the buyer? Are they venture capital firms
Yeah, so
typically?
you have private equity. There's more buyers than sellers right now. My phone rings every day. There's more buyers of franchise systems than there are sellers. So you can do the public market, yeah, but Blackstone, but you don't have to wait, by the way, 40 years. You can sell in the, multi-million dollar range and be just as happy. And there are tons of buyers. I mean, you have strategic buyers, right? They own a couple other franchises and they want to bolt this on, the Roar Capital groups out there, and then there's just the the plain vanilla private equity that want to get into the franchising space because they see how hard it is to do all the stuff we talked about here. So that pain that we talked about, that's what they're buying. It takes time. They don't have time. They're impatient. They need to make money for their fund. There's
Mhm.
not that many of them, so you have a uniqueness factor.
Yeah.
Once you pour money into those businesses, you can really scale it. Look, if you can get the 50, you can get the 500. I mean, that's basically it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. We're going to take questions if anybody has any. We've taken some as we've spoken here, but sometimes people do have follow-up questions. So if you have any questions for Tom, now's a good time to put it into the chat box. Um, so Tom, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, would you say that now is a good time for people to franchise because there are so many buyers out there?
Yeah, I think so. I also think the uncertainty that we get sometimes in a market, people really start to think about entrepreneurship. So I think not only do you have a massive mature market of people who want to buy entire franchise systems, which is awesome, and that's your ultimate exit. I think you have a bigger pool of people who want to be franchisees. I mean, people get laid off.
Mhm.
They have some severance packages, they have some money, they want to
Right.
be entrepreneur, they want to live that American dream. And to build an independent restaurant is really like it's really hard. And so people who they understand food service can become a really great franchise because if you have like an engineering type background, just a match. Someone's going to keep the bathroom clean, keep the service fast, keep things
Mhm.
going. You don't have to go sell. You don't have to go, be out there and knocking on doors and cold calling. So like the service brands are chasing a different crop of franchisee, whereas food
Mhm.
service brands can get people. It's like, look, I want to run a simple business. I work hard. Just tell me what to do. Put me in, coach. So that's why we're so busy. We were talking before this call. I mean, we're very busy right now because franchising is doing very well. Franchising is also counter-cyclical to the market. So we have a little bit of a downturn. There's more franchise buyers out there. And so there's a lot of demand for people who want to start up and own their own business. And look, everybody goes to restaurants. So it's something people can touch, they can feel, they can understand. And the success or failure at the franchisee level is usually based on the success of the franchisee. So if you can get people who really want to engage in it, you know how poorly restaurants can be run. Like that's why franchises win. They win because of the process, because they're disciplined and they know what to do and they've intentionally focused on their processes. So yeah, I'm biased, obviously, but I think this is
You're bullish, which is great.
I'm totally bullish. I think this is I think we're gonna have an unbelievable run in the franchising industry in the next 5 years. I really do.
Tom, how can people get in touch with you if they have questions?
So, my website is spadialaw.com. Obviously through you. I mean, I think that's probably the best way. It's just ask
Mhm.
David to make you can fill out my form online, but I'd rather you kind of just reach out to David and say, you know what? I would love a one-on-one. As I've told you for any of your clients, I will give a free consultation. If you want to spend a 45 minutes on a Zoom with me to talk about your business confidentially and do a really deep dive of whether franchising makes sense, I won't charge for that. So if you come through David, if you come through my website, it's different. So, reach out to David and say, hey, I really, this guy talked too much, but I want to ask him a couple of questions. I'd be happy to have that conversation. And by the way, I play the long game. I'm happy to have that conversation. And I will tell you, I don't think you're ready. You need to do X, Y, and Z as a predecessor step. Let's talk in a year. I've talked to people for 4 years and then they pull the trigger on franchising. I'm very happy to do that. I want clients to win, right? I mean, I think that reflects on my reputation. So I don't want you to do it too early. So I'm not going to sell you.
Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us. Really great discussion. Really appreciate it. I'm sure my clients do as well. Alex, thank you for putting this together. Alex on the ones and twos. Alex, when is our next webinar and what is it?
We're back next week, Monday, 11 a.m., with how to buy your restaurant real estate.
Oh, that'll be a good one. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Tom. Have a great Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.